Welcome to PM Express Business Edition. All the indicators that influences the cost of doing business in Ghana might have gone up. One can talk about inflation rate, food prices, cost of credit, prices of petroleum products, and also the possible increase in the utility tariffs that could happen somewhere in July. But how is these things that influence in businesses and how are these enterprises surviving in Ghana today? Well, on PM Express Business Edition, we try to engage all those who matter in the business and industry, so as financial space when it comes to doing business in Ghana today. I'm trying to engage the Chief Executive of the National Chamber of Commerce Industry, Macroeconomic. He's with me in studio here, and also President of AGI, that is Dr. Humphrey Duckett. On the virtual connection, Charles Mensah is a financial consultant and managing partner of Trust Consult. And how do you survive in Ghana today as a business, as all these indicators are going up? It's the wise thing to do to increase prices and maybe make your profit as a business, or what do you do in these times? All these issues wrapped up on PM Express Business Edition as I engage those in the business, industry, and finance space in surviving today's Ghana as an enterprise. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to PM Express Business Edition as we talk about surviving in the economy today as a business and enterprise. And what do you do in the face of competition, in the face of rising cost of operations, and where do we see the Father Christmas and those who would want to respond to competition? Macroeconomic is the Chief Executive of the Ghana National Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and also that is Dr. Humphrey Duckett. He's President of the Association of Ghana Industries. And Charles Mensah is a financial consultant and managing partner of Trust Consult, and he'll be joining us via Zoom in terms of the financial space and what we should be doing. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and joining us on PM Express. CEOs, and Mr. President, thank you so much. I would say, and I know that in your own special rights or own corner, you are managing enterprises apart from representing these associations and businesses. How interesting, how challenging or difficult it is in these times. I remember recently one CEO was saying that a day wouldn't pass without meeting his staff on the stairway or even at the car park with the person pleading for salary increments. Mark, let me start first with you first. How are you managing in these times?
It's been very difficult, actually. The data clearly shows what businesses are going through. If you look at the beginning of this year, the macroeconomic environment has been very harsh. And the businesses and how they are doing actually reflect what is happening within the economy. Now, don't forget, we are just coming out of COVID, and most businesses are now recovering. They are still very weak. We are not out of the woods yet. But we started with a rapid depreciation of the local currency, to the extent that at a point in time it was $1 to 8 cedis. It's even around 7 something.
7.80.
And then the fuel issue came in, and then food. Every economy that is suffering or facing these challenges of the 3 Fs, food, fuel, and finances, the potential to collapse is very high.
Repeat it again, the 3 Fs.
The 3 Fs.
Yes.
Food, fuel, and financing. The potential for collapse of the economy and that of businesses is very high. Food, in the sense that if you look at the inflation rate and the sources, you realize that a chunk of it is coming from food and food related. If you look at transportation, it's also coming from the cost of fuel. Cumulatively from January up to this time, we've had about 60% increment in fuel prices. And it's feeding into almost everything. Cost of transportation. The person who is going to buy foodstuff from Kumasi to Accra is paying high amount. The market woman is also paying high amount for it, and of course will transfer it into consumers. And what really caused major issue was also the financing that difficulty that we went through because of the downgrading. So we could not get the external support that we needed, usually around this time, to sustain ourselves. So businesses are feeling this heat, and they are all feeding into inflation. So if you want to really understand how businesses are feeling, that is the picture. And it's a very terrible situation.
Let me come to first a CEO of an industry first before he talks as a president of AGI. I mean, for you as well, I mean, I cited a scenario about one CEO was complaining that a day wouldn't pass without him walking on the stairways of the car park, and someone is asking that, say, when are you going to see our next salary increment? How are you managing these times? As a CEO first, or before you talk about AGI?
By virtue of the two hats, I'm privileged to see data and see colleagues going through similar scenarios, and therefore, when you combine two, you can.
Which comes first? You as a CEO dealing with the factors, or AGI dealing with AGI issues as well?
The events that are playing out cuts across, so it doesn't matter which of the hats you wear. It is as it is. Well, as you asked, once you realize that the inflationary trends are global, and then if you drive it into context in the subject matter of Ghana, you ask what are the push factors. You see that it's clearly a cost push inflation characteristics. And in such scenarios, underpinning by supply and cost factors, you realize that you have static demand for goods. You will see inelastic demand and constant demand. And you have a reflection of same for supply, increase in supply. And when you see such models playing out in economics, you see that it drives inflation. So in the context of Ghana, we understand from theory and from experiential knowledge by virtue of practice that you realize that the trend causes for increase in output in terms of your product and services. I'll give you a clear example. A clear example, which is one of the F's that he mentioned, is fuel. You realize that the fuel prices have been increased by OPEC as a result of external factors that we all know, and that could go to pandemic and go to the Russian activities. And as that rolls in, a fuel increase is also driving the increase of products and various prices, and you still see increase in demand. So even though there's increase in price, there's still increase in demand, and you could see that the demand factors are also inelastic. It suggests to you that these are underpinned by supply and cost factors. And when it happens this way, any enterprise that is playing in an economy of such cannot restrain pushing the cost element that are coming to him onto the final consumer. So in the space, don't be surprised to see it all over the airwaves, all over the market, that there's drastic increase in output and prices of services and products. That is what it is. But the flip side, technically, is that, however, the purchasing power of the consumer till date might have not changed, and that is why when you meet your employee on the stairway, he will ask you, "Oh God, what are you doing for me?" Because that is the effect of such a cost push factor. Then when you place in that space, one will wonder, in the said economy, what is the efficiency of the economy? Are you in the factor stage of your economy? In the factor stage, you will see resources and cheap labor playing out. So don't be surprised, irrespective of the dynamics, Ghana really plays in between the investment and the factor.
But Mr. Daka, let me come to you, because if you listen to the experts and those who matter in the inflation space, it's being seen as a supply-driven inflation.
Yes.
And then I'll come to you as an industry first.
Yes.
Why are you not supplying us enough?
No. So you realize that what happens, and I was just, when you use the cost push, it's a supply-driven. That's why I use the word underpinning. It's not about producing enough. So you see that there's a constant demand in the supply, and there is a constant demand in the demand. And it's also driven by price. So irrespective of these issues, and I've given you the stages and the characteristics of a cost push inflation. You see demand static or inelastic. You see what do you call supply same, and it's still driving price. So it isn't a matter of doing enough supply. The factors play, and I gave you the fuel example. A lot of fuel is still coming.
So cost has gone up, so it's making it difficult for you to supply.
So that's no, it's not cost has gone up.
Your input cost has gone up, sorry.
Of course, your input cost has gone up.
It's affecting supply.
You got to transfer that to the final consumer. However, the final consumer hasn't got significant change in revenue to keep buying as requested, but you have increase in price, increase in demand. And those are the factors that are playing in, and therefore when we go into the regulatory issues, we believe one of the regulators, which is Bank of Ghana, should really intervene strategically. And we of industry are suggesting that...
They are meeting now on the monetary policy...
And our word we want to put across strongly is that we don't believe an increase in policy rate will solve this.
I'll come back. Mr. Bedu, I'll come to the externalities when it comes to when you're doing economics and all the rest. But internally for the businesses as well and your members, didn't you people see this coming? And what steps did you take to minimize the shocks on your business that we wouldn't have gotten here, before I come to the externalities as well?
Well, I think there's a limit by which every business can anticipate and put in place these mitigation measures. We were aware that there's a possibility of this increment coming, but the extent that we are, the extent that we are experiencing for CD depreciation at the beginning of every year, you experience that. So we factor those things into our planning. But the extent of having inflation at 23.6, I mean, nobody, given what we were experiencing in the latter part of 2021 up to this, they really anticipated that. A lot of factors, and of course, people also attributed to Ukraine and other, Russia and other. All these things were not anticipated. So even though we were expecting it, the extent for me is too huge. And for any time there is an increment in the consumer price index, it feeds into an increment in the producer price index. And of course, that measures the cost of production over a given period of time. Now, the figure released yesterday, or I think a day before, indicated that the PPI is now 31.2% from 21.4, almost 10% increment. If you aggregate it, it means almost all the raw materials that we have, almost all the factors of production, there is some level of increment in that. Some may be local, some may be imported. If you have high inflation, it means if you are sourcing your raw materials and even your labor or other services from Ghana, the minimum you are paying is 23.6. Now, if you look at the imported inflation, for the first time in so many months, it's about 24, higher than the local annual inflation, which means that if you are importing your raw materials, before the raw materials get here, there's some level of inflation from those countries, because almost all the countries, about 50% of countries are experiencing higher inflation. So it's something that is local and also international as well. So the PPI is increasing and the consumer price index is increasing. Now, the question you need to ask, even if you produce, who is buying? It's the consumer. Now, inflation erodes the purchasing power of every consumer. That is why when they meet you, they're asking for more, because the amount they have and the amount of basket of goods or services
2 months ago, and the same buckets of goods right now.
Exactly. You need either more money or you buy less basket of goods. So the consumer is suffering. You may be able to produce. You may be able to push the price to them. The question you need to ask yourself is, are they able to buy? Consistently, they may demand, but the purchasing power is not there. So if for a company, if you want to even bring your employees to that same level that they were 2021, it means you have to increase wage, and that will also feed into your cost. So you may be able to have a fair idea of what is happening, but the extent that we are experiencing, for me, you've not had that. The 23.6, the last time we experienced was 18 years ago. And nobody anticipated that. And of course, I don't think it's going to end now. I don't see immediate end in sight to this.
The governor says that he sees we have peaked when it comes to inflation. Does that send any comfort to you guys?
For me in particular, I don't see that. You see, when you have inflation and you're able to identify that is from demand side, that you can easily use the monetary policy
to deal with
it.
But it's more of a supply thing, right?
That is immediate. But for supply side, it takes much longer time. Now, I mean, there is no food. I mean, food is short. Now, if you want to grow even maize, it will take at least 3 months, unless you are importing. When you are importing inflation. So there should be a holistic approach, not only concentrating only on the monetary side. Otherwise, you will be solving a stomach problem with paracetamol. The pains will go down, but the issue will not go.
Could be a gastro infection.
Exactly. And that is the experiencing we are having now. So we don't have to rush to increase the policy rate. And you know the effect of increment in the policy rate, the effect on the real sector is also
Some will
there.
say that inflation is eroding. It's killing the economy. It's killing your business.
Yes.
So deal with inflation right now.
No, the underpinning.
Because inflation is a bigger monster in the room than anything.
But you got to look out for the causation and then deal with it. If
Exactly.
not, because over the period, the governor has increased the monetary policy rate by 250 or aggregate around 350 over basic points over the period. And if that should have tamed the inflation, that should have happened by now. It suggests to you that there are other factors that we need to look at, and that is why we believe you need not increase the policy rate at this stage.
Let me bring in Charles Mensah. He's a financial consultant. I mean, listen to all these businesses at this time. I mean, how do you manage and deal with the situation right now? A financial consultant has managed most of these firms, advising them. What do you do in these times like this? Mr. Mensah, thank you so much for joining us on PM Express. And you've been listening to our CEOs here and also captains of industry and business associations and the concern right now. How do you maneuver out of this situation? I think we're having some technical challenges.
Okay.
We'll try and connect it to back. So do I get from you that
Yeah, I wanted to address
the policy rate?
No, the policy rate should be increased.
But the inflation is a bigger monster in the room.
Because
The inflation is eroding that reserves you are
but the
holding
bank,
in terms of
the
cash.
governor did say he believed it is peaked. So if it is peaked, give it time to do the downside approach. But if it is not, then that will go contrary to the statement he's made. And as you indicate, if you look at the dynamics, you could still feel that the triggers and the causation of the inflation are still in there. One clear example is this shortage of fertilizer. And when do you procure fertilizer and put into the planting season, and then the planting season gives you the yield for the next season? Are you sure that you could tame that scarcity now? And it's a supply constraint. That's why I use the word, it's a cost push factor that is driving these issues. And he asked one more question, that did we anticipate this inflationary rate?
Challenge,
We did.
we are in
We
right
did
now.
in industry, and I was here once with you, and we engaged on this matter. And we did say this from the 2019 when we had a policy misalignment of this benchmark discount value. And we argued out until recently we have a partial restoration, which is still not full. It's underpinning part of the cost-related matters, and that also fuels into the various events that play out from the what we call the pandemic, the supply constraint by virtue of the pandemic. We saw the rating agencies' activity that affected the exchange rate just in the early aspect of the year, that drove the exchange rate down, the domestic revenue mobilization through the budget. We saw the struggle. All these things had some impact and driven these inflationary rates up. We anticipated it because it put the debt management position of the country in a precarious position. And therefore, the cyclical effect, we saw some indications that we will go into some difficult times. So we're not surprised when we got to this.
Mr. But don't you agree with me that difficult times calls for tough decisions to be taken? At the end of the day, some sectors would hurt. But if you're able to tame inflation right now, at least your value of money is protected. We look at the rippling effect on other sectors of the economy. So it is not the time to complain about access to credit, cost of credit, because inflation is going to eat away that credit that you are holding.
Yes. What we have to do.
Mr. Bedi, let me just quickly bring in Mr. Mensah. We're having some difficulties in connecting him early on. Mr. Charles Mensah, thank you so much for joining us. He is the financial consultant and managing partner at Trust Consult. And Mr. Mensah, how do we manage or maneuver in this current challenge? Talking as a financial person as well.
George, good evening. I think I've been having some challenges earlier on trying to connect. But it depends on how your capital structure is. If you are largely dependent on borrowing from the bank, times like this is a difficult situation because the interest cost will probably eat into your profits. So where your capital structure is largely equity and a bit of debt, then you can survive around this time. But as we speak, I'm not sure that the margins that industries are making or traders are making will be enough to meet the interest cost, especially when you are importing most of the things. Unless you are doing local production, and local production is also being pushed away these days by the electricity costs also. So there's a bit of a challenge as we speak. But it is time also to reflect and do what I call the cost reduction instead of cost cutting. So you got to look at the innovative way of delivering certain services that you are providing, innovative ways of doing things. So this time for us to start thinking the best way without affecting the quality of the things. Because it's a phase, it will pass. But if you rush and cut costs, by the time the phase is gone, it will be difficult for you to come back.
But Mr. Mensah, let me cut in there. As a business, you are bleeding right now. You have costs to settle. You have credits to pay off, and all. The banks are on your neck. A day wouldn't pass without your RM calling you that, listen, how far have you gone in trying to clear the facility? Obviously, the tough measures to take right now is to restructure the business. And I know often the staff are the easy casualties. We are downsizing, we are resizing, go home and all the rest.
I think most companies have started negotiating with the employees to have a freeze on salary increase, and then also accruing the expenses and tell them that we don't have cash, but we recognize the expenditure. So when the cash flow improves, they will pay. I know some companies that have taken some restrictive measures where they are paying only 50% of the salary now, and they are accruing the next 50 for future when things improve. Because as we speak right now, if you rush to cut costs and things improve, and I pray it does, and things improve, it will be difficult for you to turn on the machine. Because once the machine is in motion, you don't rush to take certain decisions. It's a reasonable period for you to have a discussion with your employees, for you able to have a discussion with your suppliers and then your customers. So there's a bit of a negotiation as we speak. People are shifting away slightly from bank borrowing. They are now negotiating suppliers' credit, local suppliers' credit. Now, once it is a general thing in the system, the bank themselves appreciate it because the banks all usually have the best idea of the industry, of the country. So the bank itself have done some measures in their end. They'll come and discuss with you. So you have to also make an effort to ensure that the discussion you're having in the bank will inure to your benefit. But please, let's begin to look at cost reduction instead of cost cutting.
Mr. Mensah, I will not let you go because I would also want my in-studio guests to come with some comment before I bring you back. But again, quick one on the bit about the salary issues as well. How do you deal with that situation right now? Because the value of what your staff was holding 5 months ago is not the same today. Every worker is singing the song or pushing Mr. Magbedu Abuaje and Dr. Anfridake that, listen, meet me halfway if you cannot do 100%.
You see, what is it that when you increase the person's salary as a result of inflation and you can't pay? I think it's reality checks now. Even in the public sector, I noticed that when the budget was reviewed a couple of months back, they asked them to cut salary by 30%. Fuel itself has been cut. So the government, which controls a larger portion of the economy, any service doing a cost reduction exercise. And I know that some of the public sector are even complaining that how do they work with the cut in those things. But it's an efficient way of doing things. Maybe they will do more Zoom call, they will do more innovative way of doing things. Maybe customers will be served via a certain innovative approach that will deliver things to them weekly instead of daily. So people are not thinking a way out. But don't rush around it because it's just a phase. It's just a phase because of what the things we are faced with. But companies who have run solidly in the past always ensure that they keep a buffer of between 3 to 6 months of expenditure in their working capital. They keep in cash because they emphasize that things like this will happen. If I heard Dr. Humphrey Wright at the beginning, before the internet, Humphrey Wright, we were talking about how these things is eating to their capital. Now, those that have made profit in the past, what do you do with the profit? Do they share it as dividend? If you share that dividend, this is the time that you can ask your shareholders to return some of the dividend back into the business. If you didn't share and you were in those things, this is not the time to buy assets. Because now we are surviving. You need to survive before you acquire assets for the business.
Mr. Mensah, I still come back again with my question. How do you deal with those workers out there who want increment in salaries now?
It depends on what you have. If you have a very strong unionized business, it's to be real with them. Tell them as it is. That listen, we all collapse and go home, or we take a pay cut and we survive. So that after this phase, we can all go. It's a reality thing. You got to be. Don't play around words. Just tell us it is. That if I give you salary increase, the company will be no more, and you can't survive, and my company can also not survive. So reality check. Let's freeze our salary.
Mr. Mensah, I will not let you go. Hold on, I'll get back to you. Mark, let's deal with the financing, capital, and cost of funds issue right now.
You see, he made mention of the capital structure. And I also have to look at the kind of businesses we have in Ghana. How many of them are listed on the capital market? How many of them may have that equity? SMEs constitute about 80 to 90%. Most of them rely on debt in financing. They go to the bank, they get their loan. So sometimes the situation is that it's so difficult for them at this time. So that's why I'm more concerned about the issue of further increment in policy rates and eating into the interest
I get from you is a no.
It's a no.
Governor, don't do
no, we shouldn't do it. We expect that the least they can do is to maintain it at this level.
Doctor?
Yeah, because it's a no, because it's a thin line between inflation management and growth with stability in there. So if
growth is doing well, some would say.
No, so that is why at this stage, if the inflationary rate is going to eat it all up, let's take it.
What kind of growth are we having?
So says some. Okay. So you need to really. It's been tested with the data that is be churning out in the situation out there. And Charles did mention about cost-cutting measures. Look, over the last 2-3 years, we've gone through a number of activities, if I want to list COVID measures, exchange rate factors, and all these major phenomena that are happening with the rating agencies downgrading Ghana. We have gone through a lot of cost-cutting measures through
at
labor,
the business level.
Yes.
all over this period of 2-3 years.
Yes.
So at this stage, we are there.
It's down to the bones.
Oh,
the meat is gone.
Oh, excuse me.
Or the meat is still there.
And I'm not sorry.
Sorry, you're making a point.
At this stage, further cost rationalization, whether in the labor front, through plowing back dividends, we have done that over the period to survive. So we are in a very tight, difficult phenomenon worldwide. That is why, to some extent, when we had the tariff companies trying to push up a phenomenal increment, we kicked against it. We said, look, you could get some marginal stuff to break even. I know you come there, but that is one clear issue why we believe that they shouldn't go there. And number two, the governor shouldn't push up this price. And he has confessed that there's a downward trend on the inflationary rates. And based upon that, he shouldn't eat back his words. He should maintain the policy rate. And let's go back to the market.
How do you compensate those offshore investors who've also invested in your bonds? That anytime they react, you see a Ghana city dancing palogo.
Yes.
You have to compensate them.
Yes, and that is what inflation
so if you are
does to
pushing
every economy.
For the policy rate to stabilize, you should also be thinking about your offshore investors who, when they move,
Exactly.
the FX market is not that big. Any small movement, the city start dancing.
But once there's an assurance from the governor who believes he's seen the numbers that the inflation has peaked, presumably the 250 basis jack up over the period. Let's give it another quarter and see how it performs.
Quarter might be too long, some would say.
No, I don't think so. I agree with you. For a rational investor, he's looking for a real interest rate.
Yeah. And then for the local investor who needs to survive.
He also needs to survive.
How we balance the two?
So that is it. So is it between the
putting on the hat of the finance and economics
and the local investor who needs to survive? We can't stop the local investor. It's a tight one.
It's a pretty tight one. And I remember, when the governor was interviewed, I think
Bloomberg News.
Yes, he used. I think it's a very complicated issue. Of course, it's a very complicated issue.
Absolutely.
And we must know that for economic policy, there is always a trade-off.
Yes.
So once you try to use one of the policies, the trade-off will reflect in other.
And we've got consistent
other
trade-off
side.
with job losses, inability to create
Exactly.
job
So now let's look
over
at how
the
we can find a very delicate balance to ensure that we are able to satisfy investors and also not affect the real sector of the economy. It is very key. Most of the time, there's always misalignment between the monetary policy and the fiscal policy. Whenever there is inflation, we rush and we jack up the
policy rate.
The policy
It's a
rate.
demand-driven inflation.
But there is always other taxes and levies and other things that are being imposed on businesses. For businesses, they are not Father Christmas. Once you find a way to get money from them, they also find a way to get their money back, and they will transfer it to consumers. Now, if I'm importing and I'm paying 17 taxes and levies at the port, you don't expect that when I come back, I'll absorb those taxes and levies and not push it to consumers, and they all feed into inflation. So let's look at what we can do aside the monetary policy regarding the fiscal policy. Where are the areas that we can incentivize the private sector to increase their production? Where are the taxes?
At least we got three. Let's tell the governor and he's through the finance minister to deploy this. One, we are saying that restore the benchmark value to its state for manufacturers. Right? When you do that, two, give raw material discounts to all manufacturers. That will lower the import inflation.
Yes.
And as well have an effect on the domestic inflation. Three, the bi-monthly exchange rate tweaking at the port. Why don't you jack it up to 3 months or 6 months? That will reduce the cost to the importer and the manufacturer. When you trigger these issues in, we believe, to some extent, when you tackle the agri chain and put your eye on the ball and do a lot of storage of the post-harvest concern, because once you have storage systems that leads into the 1D1F processing, that will perfect the agri chain. Let that intervention be more focused. I think they started it under the PFJ and all the intervention on the agri chain. Let us look at that section. And on the other one has to do with the fuel. That is the big one in the basket. How do we manage that fuel cost, which has a lot of demand push factors and cost implication to the entire inflation target framework that we use.
Mr. Bedu, how long are you guys going to absorb the cost? Because some are saying that at a point in time, maybe burden sharing or pass it on to consumers. We've seen inflation rate go up. We've seen fuel prices go up again. They are up again. We could see transport fares going up. Not transport fares, forget about the commercial space. You are dealing with trucks that are cutting goods, logistics and all the rest. How long? Let me start with you first. When are we going to see that transition of passing on the cost to consumers?
Oh, I think
it started.
No, it just started.
And are we going to see more hikes?
More of that. When the utility companies are also anticipating of increasing their tariffs, their rate of, electricity is about 248%, water 330-something%, and you expect the businesses to absorb them and survive. The only way out is to begin to now transfer even majority of such costs to consumers, and that will, for me, will rather also push the inflation up, because if you continue to absorb, as you say, we have been absorbing during the COVID time, and at this time it's at here.
It's down to the bone.
It's down to the, so what? Any other probably way of absorbing? If you are not careful, you end up killing your. The only way out, two ways. One is to transfer the cost to consumers. The second one is to sit down for your business to collapse, or you cut down your production level. And that, for me, will have a strong negative effect on the economy.
Mr. Daka, what about competition? Some are saying that, listen, if Mr. Daka's company would want to increase the price, George Jaffe would want to survive and undercut and stay in the space. So you'll be losing out.
No, in the cost push factor or the cost push inflation, which is a supply underpinning issues, any company that seeks not to transfer the cost element to the final consumer naturally will die, because that is the ecosystem that is playing out. The only intervention one will
Economies
get,
of scale.
So when the competition matter is played in there, you realize that in your sector that you are playing with, you have no other choice. Today, I was negotiating with one of our common friends that you know very well in the logistics chain when we had to do the price transfer to him. And his finance manager wouldn't take it easy because he's already logged in a contract that has a fixed price, which was in cedis and not in dollars. So now all his profit is being eroded because I need to pass on the logistic cost to his team. And it's not easy trying to negotiate with a very good senior that presumably he might be watching, and he will say, that is not, it's a tough space. So for competition, the economic phenomena is driving everything to the highway. And you cannot suggest that you not go with it. If you do not go with it, you die, or you produce shoddy goods.
It'll be a good time to take a short break, and I'll come back to you, Mr. Mensah, as well, in going forward and how to manage the situation. This is PM Express Business Edition. Take a short break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to PM Express Business Edition as we talk about the cost of doing business. How do we survive in today's economy? Charles Mensah is a financial consultant. He's joining us virtually. He is the Chief Executive of the Ghana National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And Dr. Humphrey Yimdake, he is the President of the Association of Ghana Industries. But going forward now, we cannot forget about the fiscal space. Mr. Mensah, let me come back to you again. It appears that any cost-cutting measure now might be quite difficult for most businesses out there. We've cut to the bone.
I'm glad they use cost-cutting. I earlier on said cost reduction, so there are two separate things. And there's an area of specialty. People help people to do cost reduction exercise. The difference is that when you're doing cost reduction, you don't affect the quality of service that you are doing. When you're doing cost-cutting, it's a knee-jerk reaction, so there's a thoughtful processes as we speak. Now let me go straight to going forward. I feel strongly that the government, through the Ministry of Finance, should do target financing. There was some years back that we targeted pharmaceutical industries, and we gave them some loan at a lower cost, just because we wanted to boost the pharmaceutical sector. Same thing can be done. I want to encourage that there are some manufacturers, especially the agro-processing, we should be able to raise some long-term funding for them so that they are not affected by the money market. Because the money market, theirs is to sell money and buy money, not necessarily adding value to the agro sector. So we should target some manufacturing, selected things to have a rippling effect and give them a certain cost, a certain funding at a lower rate. And then in addition to that, there's a bit of a problem in the system where, although you are not making money, but yet you are supposed to pay your taxes on quarterly basis in advance. And that's a difficulty. So if we add the forward paying of your taxes even before you declare profit, and we targeted that at the manufacturers, we can even increase it for the traders, so the traders can pay more. Instead of they paying quarterly, we can ask them to pay more because they are trading. So they don't go to the rigmarole of stocks and then manufacturing and labor and so on and so forth. So for the manufacturing sector, we can tell them for the purpose of this exercise that we have crisis or we will be crisis. They ought not to be paying the taxes on quarterly basis.
Mr. Yimdake will be very happy at that.
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. That they will pay taxes year end. And then two, maybe we raise money just like the development bank that we have set up. That money, that seed capital that they have, we can channel $50 to $100 million for manufacturers, not traders, for manufacturers. Because once you help manufacturing, the ripple effect is that employment will be created across the chain. A trader who imports, once he clears it from the port, all he needs is a warehouse, and then the rest is done. So we can't compete. We can't compete them there. Manufacturing can't compete. So we should target the agro processing. And I'm sure that when we begin to look at that holistically, where we are targeted, just like we are doing targeted inflation, we should do targeted manufacturing funding. And within a year, we'll come back to the drawing board and say, here it is, a solution have been found for Ghana, for us. And then leave the traders. As for the traders, anything you do, they will trade. They will and pay you.
Mr. Mensah, I'll come back to you. Mr. Mark Abdul-Budget, I mean, we cannot forget about the fiscal space. Those who are managing the economy. What should be some of the things that they should be doing right now to minimize that cost of doing business right now? Because some are saying that raise more revenue, some are saying that cut down expenditure. Which one comes first? What should they be doing right now for you and your members?
No, for us, as for cut down expenditure, they have done a bit of it, of cutting down 30% of whatever expenditure. But in terms of raising revenue, who are you raising the revenue from? Largely, most of the revenue is coming from the businesses, which means that they have to pay the tax, as he said, upfront. The money that they could have used probably to reinvest or at this difficult moment used to actually build up their businesses. Now they are now paying. So let's look at some of these issues and realize that at this time, this is not a normal times. What can we do to help the businesses? If imported inflation is high, what are we doing at the port? Where are the areas where at least we can reduce certain level of taxes, or to the extent that we are cushioning the businesses? That is where I want us to look at. This is a discussion we can have extensively with them, so that we will be able to tell them where actually is pinching hard, and then we can come out with a proper fiscal policy to be able to incentivize the private sector. Now, the issue of the structure of the economy is still coming to play. We have been saying years back, and if you ask any professor, if you ask any,
way back in my
they will tell you, they will tell you that we are import-led economy. We need to. Now it's a wake-up call that inflation is biting us. Imported inflation is biting us. What can we do locally to ensure that we produce most of the things that we are importing? And that is where the agro-processing is key. Just look at fruit juice alone, just fruit juice. The amount of money we use to import fruit juice. We have the raw materials, the planting for food and jobs, all those things we're supposed to feed into the one district, one factory. What is happening? I'm still wondering why we have shortage of certain foodstuffs in Ghana. When there is this much talk about planting for food and job, a lot of money has been pumped in. We should not be talking about it at this time. So the structure of the economy, let's look at it. Let's add value to our raw materials. It will require monetary policy. It will require fiscal policy. And we are ready as businesses to talk to the managers of the economy.
Doc, I mean, industry, looks like everybody is now turning to you. You have to do magic for us.
No, we have stated
because we need food on our table at a very low price.
And I keep telling
so
you.
What do you want government to do for you
and
right
I repeat
now?
it one.
Those immediate measures that should be done right now.
One, restore the benchmark value as we requested. We demonstrated beyond
the traders are not giving government a breathing room.
Well, then that is the price. That's the cost of what is happening. A number of issues have led to this. One, that is one. Two, the raw material bits that industry is using. Let us discount it zero for industries to import and increase productivity. Granted that this inflation is being driven by productivity, we will not find ourselves in this space. Thirdly, I said, peg the exchange rate at the port. Instead of every 2 weeks, possibly start with a quarter, and let's see the effect. Fourthly, let the tax amnesty that government granted industry and the entire economy kindly extend it. You know, it was extended to June. We pray that within the difficulty, we are battling with our taxes. Mr. Minister, please extend the tax amnesty, possibly for a year, so that we can get a breather to readjust and plow in some of the funds back into the system. Because I've told you, we've cut all that we could cut. The element now is that some will say, currently, everywhere, you are being chased for your taxes. And then I've spoken about the pegging of the exchange rate at the port. And one issue that we need to really emphasize on, and he mentioned, is the 1D1F planting for food and jobs. One difficulty that we were so excited about on the PFJ was that the planting for food and jobs would have enabled the production of industrial raw materials.
But what is happening?
So, well, I
Food
keep,
inflation. So
well,
the industries go and
you see,
or
these
what?
things happen.
Or government failed to do what they have to do. What is happening?
You know, when
Mr.
you engage the government statistician last week,
Yeah.
he brought to the fore the imported inflation and the domestic inflation. And he said to you, the imported inflation today has deviated from the norm, and that today the imported inflation is higher than the domestic inflation. Ever since, it's always been the domestic inflation higher than the imported inflation. That which is prevailing in the month of April should have been the perfect situation in an efficient economy. However, what has been prevailing over the period where we have domestic inflation always higher than lower indicates to you there are a lot of inefficiencies. And that is why you realize that we are not getting enough industrial raw material. The fact that you see a few oranges sitting down on the roadside or rotten, it is not sufficient possibly to power an industry with some particular capacity to display economic of scale. Because you see, the smaller you are, your cost is high. But the bigger you are, you drop the scale and then you can be competitive on the global market. The dynamics are many. And we are willing, like Bedu said, to engage government. But I've listed about 5 or 6 areas that we believe they are short-term in nature. If government deploys it, it will reverse these gains. And the governor should not.
I'll be coming to you because there's a mid-year budget review that something might be done right now. Let me go to Mr. Mensah in a minute and as you try to wrap up for you, your final thoughts, your advice for businesses and government in a minute or 2 minutes, Charles.
Okay, for government, I think that the school feeding program that we have now, I don't see why the kids should be fed on a staple diet which is imported rice. So we should make it a community base. And therefore, if you go to Western region, or in Zima for that matter, where I come from, kids should not be fed with rice. They should be fed with acheke. And therefore, when you do that, you are boosting the local economy within that community. The same thing should be done in Brongahafo and the north and things like that. Their local food should be processed and made nutritious so that the kids there will be fed on, not imported rice. Because that's also a major problem for us. Okay. When I see trucks load of rice imported going to the secondary schools, that we are going to use for the children, I cry. I cry because we are feeding them on imported rice, and that's not good for us. Then I wonder, I disagree slightly with Dr. Dake. It's to do with the amnesty of the taxes. Look, the amnesty was brought in because we want people to pay their taxes. Oh, well. I think we've done amnesty. We shouldn't do an amnesty again.
Okay, and final on the businesses as well. That's what you wrap on it, yeah. Yeah.
Yes, on the businesses side, I think take a critical look. Start discussing things with your workers. Some may have innovative ideas that you haven't even thought of.
Okay.
So you should cry with them, discuss a few things with them, and they'll come up with new ideas. And I wish all of us a good luck in going forward.
Mr. Dake, talk to us. Your final.
My final thought. Let me reiterate and emphasize that there should not be any increment in the policy rate.
I see.
Secondly, we know where the inflation is coming from.
Food.
It's food.
Transport.
It's transport.
Fuel.
It's fuel. Let's tackle it from there. Let's look at the supply constraints and ensure that those that matter and require support should be given to them. If it's agriculture, let's support. If it's manufacturing, let's support. And we'll be able to have a long-term solution to the current inflation that we are having.
Doc? Well, he said it all. Let's disaggregate those high flyers that are driving inflation and tackle them. And also the primary industrial product, the cereals that the plentiful food and jobs are producing. Please, let us export surplus, store, do the FIFO-LIFO, bring in, first out, store enough, and when you have surplus, export. Until then, we trust God that we'll get out of this very soon.
The F, right. But it has to be PM Express Business Edition, engaging those who matter in the business space. Mr. Mark Bedu-Abuaji, Chief Executive of the Ghana National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Dr. Yim Dake, he's President of the Ghana Association of Industries. And Charles Mensah, he is a financial consultant. I believe the debate will still go on in your homes and your offices about the rising cost of business and what should the Bank of Ghana do and the Minister of Finance do in these times to mitigate the shocks on your business. This is PM Express Business Edition. Have a great day.